What now?
A single gunshot split the noon quiet over Pine Ridge, Wyoming, and every head on the street turned toward the sound before they turned toward her. She stood in the open door of the stagecoach with the sun behind her, one long red braid falling over her shoulder, a satchel worn soft by 5 years of hard road slung across her back, and a revolver holstered low on her hip like it had grown there. Nobody in that town had seen Clara Vance in 5 years. Most of them had buried her in their minds long before anyone dug a grave. She stepped down into the dust, and the whole street seemed to hold its breath with her. The blacksmith's hammer stopped mid-swing. A dog stopped barking. Somewhere behind the mercantile window, a curtain twitched. Clara did not smile. She did not wave. She walked forward like a woman counting debts, and everyone standing between her and the saloon at the end of the street understood, without a word being said, that the counting had already begun. Wyoming in the spring of 1888 was a hard place to hold on to anything, especially land. The government had promised settlers a fair shot at a homestead if they worked it, fenced it, and proved it up within 5 years. What the government never printed on those land patents was how easily a signature could be forged, how quietly a deed could be altered in a back room, and how a man with enough money could turn the law into a leash for anyone who stood in his way. That was the truth of Pine Ridge, and it was the truth that had swallowed the Vance family whole. John Vance ran the saloon at the corner of Main and 2nd now, a business he never wanted and could barely stand to walk into some mornings. He kept his head down, poured whiskey for men he despised, and came home each night to 2 little girls who depended on him for everything. Folks in town believed they knew his story. They believed he had driven his own wife out into the Badlands to save his own skin when the land troubles came. They were wrong about nearly all of it, and John had carried that wrongness alone for 5 long years because the truth would have cost him something he could not risk losing again. Clara Vance had not come back to relive old grief. She had come back to collect on it. Somewhere out past the ridgeline stood the homestead where her life had been torn apart, and somewhere in this town sat the men who had done the tearing. She intended to find every one of them before the sun went down on Pine Ridge again. Hey, quick question. How are you feeling right now? Steady? Maybe a little uneasy? Good. Hold on to that feeling, because Clara Vance is about to test it. Before we ride any further, if you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Let's ride into the next adventure together. 5 years earlier, Clara had walked out of Pine Ridge with nothing but the clothes on her back and a signed paper she never remembered signing. The Badlands should have finished her within a week. Instead, an old trapper named Otis Grimm found her half dead near a dry creek bed, nursed her through a fever, and taught her the only trade a woman alone could survive on that frontier: how to read a trail, how to read a man's intentions before he spoke them, and how to put a rifle round exactly where she meant it to go. She spent those years working bounty contracts across 3 territories, and she was good at it. Good enough that lawmen in Cheyenne knew her by name and outlaws knew her by reputation. Every dollar she earned went into a tin box, and every night she counted it, not because she loved money, but because money was the one thing nobody could forge a claim against if she kept the receipts herself. It was a hard lesson learned in the worst possible way, and she made sure it never happened to her again. What never left her, no matter how many miles she put between herself and Wyoming, was the memory of a baby's cry cut short by a slamming door, and a husband who would not meet her eyes as 2 men dragged her toward a wagon. She had spent 5 years believing John Vance chose his own comfort over her life. That belief was the fuel in her rifle, and the reason she boarded a stagecoach the moment a letter reached her, written in a shaking, unfamiliar hand, warning her that the man who ruined her family was about to ruin another one. John Vance woke every morning to the same weight sitting on him before his boots even hit the floor. He ran the saloon because Baron Silas Thorne owned the paper on it, and that paper was the only thing standing between John's daughters and the street. Lily, 13 years old and sharper than most grown men in town, handled the household accounts better than John did most days, keeping a careful ledger of every dollar that came in and went out, because her father had taught her early that a family without a clear accounting of its own money was a family one bad month away from losing everything. The toddler, little Josephine, everyone called her Josie, was 2 years old now, and she had John's stubborn chin and her mother's watchful eyes. John held her every chance he got, as if holding her tightly enough could make up for what he had not been able to protect 5 years earlier. "Papa, Mr. Thorne's man came by again this morning," Lily said one evening, setting down the ledger with more force than the moment required. "He said the note is due at the end of the month, and if we're short, he'll take the saloon instead of the payment." "I know," John said. "You always say you know," Lily answered. "You never say what you're going to do about it." "I'm working on it, Lily. Working on it hasn't paid a bill yet." John set down the glass he was cleaning. "Your grandmother used to say a debt you don't understand owns you twice. I understand this one just fine. I'm handling it." Lily studied him a long moment, the way she always did when she suspected he was hiding something larger than a saloon note, and then she went back to her figures without another word. Clara walked through the saloon doors at noon, and John Vance dropped a whiskey glass hard enough that it cracked against the floorboards. For 3 full seconds, neither of them said anything at all. The room, half full of ranch hands and card players, went so quiet a man could have heard the dust settle. "Clara," John finally managed. "You look surprised," she said. "I would have thought a man who signed my exile personally would recognize the ink still on his hands." "You don't understand what happened." "I understand exactly what happened. You handed me to 2 strangers and let them ride me out past the ridge with nothing but a canteen. 5 years, John. 5 years I spent learning how to survive what you did to me. If you'll just let me explain." "I didn't come here for an explanation," Clara said, stepping close enough that only he could hear her next words. "I came here because I got a letter telling me Silas Thorne is about to do to some other family exactly what he did to ours. I intend to stop him. Whether you help me or get out of my way is the only choice you have left." Behind the bar, Lily had gone still, watching a mother she barely remembered speak to her father in a voice made of iron. Something in her chest recognized that voice anyway, some old memory buried under 5 years of grief, and for reasons she could not yet name, she believed every word Clara said. Clara made John walk the 2 miles out to the old homestead that afternoon, her revolver never drawn but never far from her hand either. The house stood weathered and half collapsed now, the porch where she had once hung laundry sagging under years of neglect. "Start talking," she said, "and you'd better start with the truth, because I've spent 5 years learning to spot a lie before it finishes leaving a man's mouth." John's voice broke halfway through the first sentence. "Thorne's men took Josie the night before. She was 6 weeks old, Clara. They held her in a line shack out past Miller's Creek and told me if I didn't sign the paper putting you out and putting this land under Thorne's name, I'd never see her again. I had an hour to decide. You were already 3 miles out looking for the milk cow when they came for me." Clara felt the ground shift under a version of the story she had carried like a stone for 5 years. "You could have told me. We could have fought them together. I was 24 years old with a gun to my daughter's future, and no time to think straight. I made the choice I thought would keep both of you alive. I got Josie back 2 days later, half-starved, and I have hated myself every single day since for not finding a better answer. And Lily? Where was she that night? Hidden in the root cellar. She heard everything. She's carried it longer than either of us know." Clara said nothing for a long while, staring at the house where her whole life had once fit inside 4 walls, and for the first time since stepping off that stagecoach, the fire in her chest burned toward a different target than her husband. The truth about Silas Thorne ran deeper than one blackmailed family. Thorne had inherited his fortune from a father who built it on cattle contracts and a talent for finding legal loopholes, and Silas had spent the years since expanding that fortune by targeting homesteaders who did not know how to read the fine print on their own land patents. His method was simple and brutally effective. He would buy up a settler's debt from the territorial bank, wait for a bad season, and then offer a loan against the land itself, one written in language dense enough that few ranchers understood they were signing away their water rights along with their money. Marshall Miller, the town's sworn lawman, took a monthly envelope from Thorne to look the other way whenever a family's deed mysteriously changed hands. Clara had seen this pattern before on other bounty jobs out east. Syndicates that used paperwork instead of bullets because paperwork was legal and bullets were not. She sat with John and Lily at the kitchen table that night with a stack of old land documents Lily had been quietly collecting for over a year. "You kept all this?" Clara asked, genuinely startled. "Somebody had to," Lily said. "Marshall Miller keeps a ledger of every deed transfer in his office. I've been copying pages from it whenever he steps out for his supper. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I just knew it mattered." Clara looked at her daughter with something between pride and disbelief. "You understand what this is?" "This is evidence, Lily. Real evidence. If we get this in front of a federal land office, Thorne's whole scheme collapses." "Then let's collapse it," Lily said. And for the first time in 5 years, John Vance heard his daughter sound genuinely hopeful. That night, after Josie and Lily had gone to sleep, Clara and John sat on the back step of the saloon under a wide Wyoming sky, and the anger between them finally had room to soften into something else. "I used to lie awake out there," Clara admitted, "telling myself I hated you enough to never think about this porch again. I was lying to myself the whole time." "I never stopped loving you," John said. "I just stopped believing I deserved to say so." "You don't get to decide that alone anymore," Clara said, and when he reached for her hand, she let him take it. They talked until the stars shifted position overhead, about Josie's first steps that John had watched alone, about Lily's stubborn courage that clearly came from her mother, about 5 years of separate grief that had somehow, impossibly, grown into the same shape. When John finally leaned in and kissed her, it was slow and certain, the kind of kiss that closes one chapter of a life and opens the door to another, and Clara let herself feel something she had locked away since the day she left. Hope that this family might still be worth fighting for, together. By morning, the Vance family had become something Silas Thorne had never accounted for, a unified front with a lawman's own records working against him. Lily laid out her copied ledger pages across the table like a general planning a campaign, marking every family Thorne had pushed off their land in the last 3 years. "There's a pattern," Lily said. "He always moves right before the county land office does its spring inspection. If we can get these pages to the federal inspector before he arrives next week, Thorne can't buy his way out of it." "And Miller?" John asked. "Miller's scared of Thorne, not loyal to him," Clara said. "A scared man switches sides the moment the winning side looks safer. We just need to make sure he sees which side that is before Thorne does." Josie toddled across the floor and grabbed a fistful of Lily's papers, and for one brief moment, the whole tense plan dissolved into laughter as Lily scooped her sister up and away from the evidence. It was a small thing, a family laughing together in a room that had been silent with grief for 5 years. But John caught Clara's eye across the table, and both of them felt the same quiet certainty. Whatever came next, they would face it as a family, not as scattered pieces of one. Word of Lily's stolen ledger pages reached Thorne faster than anyone expected, because Marshall Miller, still more afraid of his employer than curious about redemption, reported the missing documents the moment he noticed them gone. By nightfall, Thorne's men had surrounded the old homestead where Clara had insisted the family regroup. Believing its distance from town gave them time to plan. "Vance," Thorne's voice carried across the yard, backed by the sound of a dozen rifles being readied. "Bring me back what your daughter took. Sign this land over clean, and everyone walks away breathing tonight." Inside, Clara checked her revolver with steady hands. "He's bluffing about the walking away part." "I know," John said, pulling Josie close against his chest and keeping a firm hand on Lily's shoulder. "Get the girls to the root cellar," Clara said. "I need you steady when this starts, John." "Can you be steady?" "I've been waiting 5 years to prove I can be," John answered, and for once, Clara heard no guilt in his voice at all, only resolve. Baron Silas Thorne stood trial in the territorial court 6 weeks later, and the federal land office used Lily's careful copies to reverse 11 fraudulent land transfers, returning stolen homesteads to the families who had originally proved them up. Thorne was sentenced to serve real time for fraud and conspiracy, his fortune seized to repay the families he had robbed. Marshall Miller lost his badge and his freedom both, convicted of taking bribes and obstructing federal land claims. A fall from grace the whole town watched with grim satisfaction. The Vance family, meanwhile, received something better than any courtroom verdict. The original homestead deed, the one falsified under threat 5 years earlier, was restored to Clara and John jointly, their names written clean and legal, for the first time since the trouble began. John sold the saloon to a young couple just starting out, and put the money into rebuilding the house Clara had once hung laundry outside of. On a warm morning that fall, with the homestead rebuilt and painted white against the Wyoming sky, John Vance married Clara Vance for the second time. A small ceremony on the same porch where they had once said their vows as frightened young homesteaders with nothing but hope and a claim to their name. Lily stood beside her mother in a new dress she had picked out herself, and Josie, 3 years old now and full of opinions, insisted on carrying the ring herself in a small tin box, the same kind of box Clara had once used to count every dollar she could never let anyone take from her again. As the sun set gold over the ridge that had once nearly buried her, Clara Vance stood on her own porch, on her own land, with her whole family gathered close, finally, fully, and permanently home. Hey, before we ride into that sunset together, one quick thing. If John, Clara, Lily, and little Josie earned a place in your heart tonight, this is the moment to hit subscribe and leave a like, comment, and share. Tell me in the comments how you would have handled Silas Thorne if that rifle had been in your hands instead of Clara's. I will be reading every answer. Now, let's finish what we started. As the last light faded over the rebuilt homestead, the lesson of Pine Ridge settled over the whole valley like evening dust. Land can be stolen with a pen just as easily as with a gun. Debts can be twisted into weapons by men who never intend to let you pay them off. And the only real defense an ordinary family has is understanding the paper they sign and the people they trust to witness it. Clara Vance did not win her home back with vengeance alone. She won it back with evidence, with patience, and with a family brave enough to stand together once the truth finally came out. Thank you for riding along on this journey through the American frontier. If tonight's story found its way into your heart, stay a while longer and explore the rest of this channel for more tales of resilience, courage, and the kind of love that survives even the harshest winters. Until the next story finds you, take care of the people who stood by you when it mattered, keep your own paperwork close, and ride tall. The end.